Cyril Ramaphosa has written an impassioned letter about corruption in the ANC. Now, Ramaphosa says the party should publicly disassociate itself from anyone accused of corruption. He says that as the inheritors of the legacy of people such as Nelson Mandela and O.R. Tambo, the ANC has to be honest with the people of South Africa. President Ramaphosa highlights that South Africans aren't protesting out of hatred, but because they feel betrayed. He ends the letter by saying that he intends, as leader of the ANC and as president, to end all forms of corruption. Now let's get some reaction on that letter from President Cyril Ramaphosa with political analyst Karima Brown. She joins me now live. Karima, a very good morning to you, or rather a very good afternoon to you. Now, of course, the president highlighting things that South Africans already know, South Africans have already heard, and South Africans have been very upset about for 26 years. What are we hearing differently in this particular letter?
Morena, I think for me what is different about this letter is the tone. There is an air of desperation about it. This is a man who leads an organization that is knee-deep in not just a PR crisis, but a crisis of political morality. Every single day we are inundated with, allegations and, in fact, some instances, hard proof of senior ANC leaders that are involved and implicated in corruption, whether it is COVID-19 related, whether it is corruption to do with, water tanks, schools, state capture, you name it. The African National Congress's DNA has become, affected by corruption. And I think that what for me is different from this letter to other, correspondence from the party president is this air of utter desperation. The president says in this letter to fellow members of the organization that the ANC stands as accused number one in the dock when it comes to corruption. So I think that there is an air of desperation. There is also, I think, the knowledge, the deep knowledge that in many ways, Morena, South Africa is at a tipping point. Given the hardships that people have experienced under COVID-19, I think the president is very aware that South Africans are extremely disappointed, hurt and angry and quite, rightly fed up with this level of impunity coming from members of the governing party. And that is patently obvious in the tone, the language, and also just like I said, that air of desperation that you read in these words.
Karima, this is happening a year before the local government elections, which in 2016, they essentially lost to the DA, if we're going to be pitting two parties against each other. How are we supposed to, as South Africans, believe that the ANC genuinely thinks that they are in the wrong and that they actually are going to change anything?
You see, this is exactly the issue. I mean, if you look at this letter, all you have to ask yourself is, so how did the members of the African National Congress led, provincial legislature in KwaZulu-Natal swear in, Ms. Gumede as a member of the provincial legislature, given the fact that she stands accused of being involved in large-scale corruption in the eThekwini municipality? She went on television saying that South Africa will be nothing without the African National Congress, pretty much almost echoing the sentiments of former President Jacob Zuma when he said the ANC matters more than South Africa. And it really just, I think, creates this impression that African National Congress leaders believe that somehow the rule of law, the constitution, all the rules that society must play by, all the ethics, the morality that applies to people like us and ordinary citizens does not apply to them. And I think that people will be hard-pressed to find President Cyril Ramaphosa's words comforting, given the fact that his own organization in the largest province in the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, had the audacity to swear in Zandile Gumede as a member of the provincial legislature and thinks that she's fit to hold office. So it's a massive contradiction. And I think therein lies the problem for Cyril Ramaphosa. South Africans are simply not believing anymore what comes out of the mouths of leaders of the African National Congress, because people believe that the party speaks through both sides of its mouth when it comes to the issue of corruption.
Karima, we have made progress in dealing with corruption in the state. That's one of the things that the president says in his letter to ANC members. But these are things that should have never been there to be dealt with in the first place. I mean, he raises matters of bringing up the NPA, the SIU, special tribunal, all the kinds of things, you know, the state capture inquiry, things that should have never happened in the first place. So South Africans are asking, you know, what are we supposed to be believing in terms of what is not going to be happening in terms of corruption going forward? Can we believe that there will not be any kind of corruption going forward that should have never been there in the first place?
I think unless politicians start facing the music in courts of law and actually go to prison and serve prison terms, unless that happens, South Africa is basically not going to believe anything that comes from the African National Congress or any other political party for that matter on the issue of corruption. Generally, the public believes that this is just more and more talk. I mean, I had the National Police Commissioner, Kehla Sitole, on this morning, and he couldn't explain to me how a senior police officer in KwaZulu-Natal, who is head of the supply chain management and procurement in that province, he stands accused of having bribed the former head of the Hawks, Johan Boysen, in that province. He's still in his job as we read new reports that the police are again being investigated for tender irregularities related to PPE. We've had the former head of the South African Police Force, Khomotso Pahlane, sacked. He's facing charges of corruption as well, linked to procurement. So there's a deep-seated gap between what is said and what is done. And until there is action, until people are actually tried and successfully prosecuted for corruption, I think South Africans are not going to believe what comes from political leaders. But I think for me, the question is not whether South Africans believe. It is what President Ramaphosa is prepared to do that we have to judge him on. So, for example, he has Ms. Kusela Diko on a leave of absence. She's implicated again in a front page story in detail in the Sunday Times. Why is she still on a leave of absence? Surely she should be completely suspended whilst the investigation is on. She's also a member of the Gauteng Provincial Executive of the African National Congress. If the president was really keen to demonstrate that he's not prepared to tolerate this kind of behavior, he can actually put greater distance between himself and Ms. Kusela Diko by way of example, Morena, to show and demonstrate that no matter what the proximity to high office, that if you stand accused, you will be investigated, the procedures will be followed, but you will not stay in your position, because the damage that you are doing to that institution, which is the presidency, and also to the governing party, is so bad that you need to step aside. And until that happens, I'm not able to say conclusively that he will be taken seriously. And that's why I said in the beginning, Morena, there's a tinge of desperation to the sound of what Cyril Ramaphosa is saying in that impassioned letter that you have in front of you.
Most definitely. I want to bring in ENCA's political editor, Bravuyo Mvoko, now. Bravuyo, a very good afternoon to you as well. We can bash the ruling party of South Africa till day's end, but surely there are positives, I would imagine, that can be taken from their governance, maybe even positives from this letter that the president has written to ANC members about the things that they've done. You know, he does say that we each need to be a solution in that party. He says, can they be a solution? What has been some of the things that they've done that South Africans can be proud of?
Well, that's the ANC president has decided to go public with this, says there is a degree of positivity, Morena, that we'll have to appreciate. But then, if you consider the fact that the president is raising things that have been raised over and over again before, that is something to worry about. But it also suggests that he is not willing within the ANC itself. I mean, the National Executive Committee of the ANC met just a week ago, you know. So what has changed in the space of a week? All the things I would argue that he's raising now are things that were there before they went into that National Executive Committee meeting. So there is a very real, tangible problem that clearly the president can't see his way through. Hence, he is in all probability now appealing to broader South Africa to actually keep. In other words, this is not just a letter to the ANC itself. It's a venting out of the frustrations that he's actually getting. And here's something that to me is also interesting. If you look at some of the things that he says need to happen for the situation to change, he mentions, among other things, the need for people to appear before the ANC's integrity committees, but also to abide by the decisions of the integrity committee. Now, take a province like Gauteng, where one of the MECs, the MEC of sport, in the run-up to elections, was found. He was on tape intimidating government officials, getting them to do something that they were not supposed to do. Why did he want them to break the rules? So that, because by building those combi courts, Faith Kekana thought that that would increase the ANC's chances of being elected. What then happened? The Integrity Committee in Gauteng looked at the case and ruled that she was on the wrong and should resign. But what happened? It was the morally upright leadership of the ANC in Gauteng that actually blocked that from happening. Today, she is still in that position. So we've been here before. Yes, as much as the president is venting out and really calling upon every cadre of the ANC to come on board, but my interpretation is that he's also appealing to wider South Africa. But as much as he is doing that, he has a very long way to go before he actually gets the ANC to do the things he's asking it to do.
Bravo. Karima said earlier on that it's a desperate call and you're saying it's a venting. So essentially what we can say that this is a cry for help from the president, and it's a cry for help not only, as you say, to the ANC, but to greater South Africa. Is there anybody that can be hearing the president's cry for help, and is there anybody that can actually help him, you know, turn this South African ship around?
It is the like-minded people within the ANC, of which, it must be said, there are many, but not as many as to really deal with the other forces that stand in opposition. The ANC's Secretary General, we had an interview with him about over a week ago or so. He's adamant. He says nothing wrong, for example, with members of his family doing business with the government. Absolutely nothing wrong. What do we expect them to do was his refrain. Now, if you have people like that in charge and in control and on a full-time basis having to run that organization from Luthuli House, the president is up against a huge, big brick wall. It's not going to be easy. And you have seen over the past week the military veterans, ex-MK operatives coming out saying the president, the ANC, must deal with corruption and those forces within society that were responsible in part for ousting the former president Jacob Zuma must now come out and condemn the corruption that we're seeing under Cyril Ramaphosa's watch. But you know for a fact that that's not what they meant. You know, they are proxies for the war that is going on within the ANC between those who want the right things that the president is asking for in that letter to be done and those who stand in opposition. Because for them, it means that they can stop, they are being asked to stop their corruption, but also they know that if there is enough will, they will end up in jail and having to pay back the monies that they got unduly. So it's not as simple as all that. It doesn't mean that because it's making this cry that tomorrow morning you're going to see the right-thinking people in the ANC actually winning over those that are responsible for the mess that the party is in. There's a much bigger battle that they have to fight, but it's a battle, it's a fight that cannot be postponed simply.
Karima, I want to bring you back into this and ask, the president says there are people that need to be facing the Integrity Committee, but then you have situations where the sons of, the Secretary General, Ace Magashule, are being implicated in the corruption around COVID-19 and the awarding of tenders. How then do you get members in the ANC in front of the Integrity Committee when they are using their family members as people who are, running the corruption in the COVID-19 pandemic?
Look, I think the point that Vio is making, that this is part of a much larger fight in the African National Congress, is an important one. So whilst I said that this letter sounds very desperate, it is Cyril Ramaphosa reaching out to larger South Africa. We must remember that on Friday night, several civil society and social justice movements came together and hosted the first anti-corruption rally, virtually. And these are the same organizations that led the push against state capture, and we eventually saw former President Jacob Zuma having to resign from office. And I think this is another offensive. So the battle lines are drawn here, and as we saw, the different factions are gearing up. The MK veterans, for example, suggesting that it's not just state capture allegations of corruption that need to be looked at, also people that are seen to be allies of President Ramaphosa implicated. So they are saying what's good for the goose must be good for the gander. But the issue here, Morena, is that whilst the ANC warring factions are, fighting each other tooth and nail, South Africans are actually the ones that are pulling at the short end of the stick. South Africans are dying. They are in the front line against a disease. They are not getting PPE. And it's ANC people that are getting rich off the back of this. So whilst I have appreciation that this is a factional battle in the African National Congress, I think ordinary South Africans should see the president's letter as an invitation to take action, to hold the governing party accountable, and to do everything in their power to be the change that they want to see. One, in the political system, in parties, but also two, in the political morality or lack thereof that we have in South African society. Because it looks as if President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to need all the help that he's going to get, because he is being opposed right from inside his own organization by people like Ace Magashule, who are incredibly powerful and who have used this opportunity, particularly as you see someone like Kusela Diko, who's historically been associated with an opposing faction, not necessarily in Cyril Ramaphosa's camp, but certainly not with the state capturers, believe that they can now use this as a stick to beat the president with. So I think that South Africans need to see this as a call to action and as a call to rally behind efforts to clean up not just the ANC, but society and other institutions as well. But this cannot just be a battle that happens in the ANC. This must involve all South Africans.
Pravuyo, this is an invitation, as Karima says, to South Africans to get involved in changing South Africa for their own betterment, but it's also an appeal to South Africans to try and change their hearts and the outlook that they have perhaps of the ANC and the rest of the country. To what extent can this letter get to making sure that that happens, that South Africans have a different outlook than they have right now of the ruling party?
It's actually very important and not a futile exercise, as some people have already been saying on social media, for example, that if you have an ANC where the corrupt are more than or more powerful than those who want the ANC to do the right thing. So there is really no point in what Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to do here. Here's why I think that would be, or to think like that would actually be wrong. If you cast your mind back to when, capture was really at its peak, and everyone thought that there was no way the situation could change, particularly because among the people who were implicated was none other than the president of the country and the president of the ANC himself. But if you look at what society got to do, it actually got to force the hand of the ANC, even though you still had these very powerful people who didn't want the rot to stop because they had everything to benefit from it, and state law enforcement institutions were hollowed out. So we didn't really, you remember what happened in Parliament. MPs were turned into the president's imbongis and prepared to, stand there and actually protect him. That changed in no small measure due to pressure and a lot of activism that was reignited from civil society, former members or leaders of the ANC, and just civil society broadly. Public servants that were prepared to risk their jobs, even life and limb, to try and turn the situation around. So I would argue that what President Cyril Ramaphosa is doing here is not a futile exercise. It depends on what happens next.
There is the letter for you, South Africans, to judge from the President and get your thoughts and emotions about what it is you think he is saying. But that's where we're going to leave that part for now. That is ENCA's political editor, Bravuyo Mvoko, and political analyst and the host of The Fix on ENCA, Karima Brown, just giving us analysis of what it is the President has said, not only to ANC members, but to you, South Africans, as well.